Well, thank you for returning. What we want to do in this lesson is to take a look at the prevalent viewpoints about the topic of masturbation. This audio instruction is designed to teach you the various positions others advocate about masturbation with the intention of equipping you with an awareness of what these positions believe and teach. The results can increase your effectiveness in working with young people who are flirting with the thrill of masturbation, or to help the person involved with masturbation to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So, what are some of the prevalent viewpoints? First of all, in the medical community, the Harvard Medical School textbook claims that masturbation is part of the third stage of male development and that masturbation is normal. The writer states, quote, "There is no risk of either pregnancy or disease with masturbation. Masturbation is viewed as a matter of release from sexual tension. The textbook denounces the myths associated with masturbation. Quote, you may have heard that masturbation causes blindness or gives you hairy palms, but this is nonsense. It is a common, harmless activity that gives pleasure, reduces tension, and may be a helpful way for you to delay having sex until you feel mature enough to handle the responsibility." In the Mayo Clinic textbook, editor-in-chief David Larson affirms the normalcy of masturbation. Quote, "There is nothing wrong with masturbation during your teen years and beyond. It is acceptable because one is allowed to savor the sexual fantasies, provided masturbation is not a public display. It should be viewed as normal, acceptable, and not harmful. This book claims that masturbation produces a sensual pleasure and there should be no fear associated with it. Larson states that young people are made to feel guilty because of old, unfounded myths. In Mosby's Medical, Nursing, and Allied Health Dictionary, Kenneth N. Anderson states that masturbation is normal and harmless. Hopkins Medical Information says masturbation is the safest form of sex possible because it doesn't involve the transmission of bodily fluids from one person to another and carries with it no risk of pregnancy or infection. It is not naughty, evil, or sick. Dr. Clegg continues by saying that most researchers assert that masturbation can be a healthy release from sexual tensions. Now, the psychological community. In the psychiatric dictionary, you can read, quote, masturbation is usually accompanied by fantasies that are of a recognizably sexual nature, typically resulting in orgasm. Psychic masturbation is also recognized where fantasy alone is sufficient to cause orgasm without direct physical manipulation. The masturbatory act then has two aspects: form, or the physical manipulation, and content, the nature of the accompanying or provoking fantasy. The conclusion, quote, masturbation can be considered psychologically normal during childhood and is a major avenue for the discharge of instinctual tension. Under present cultural conditions, masturbation is considered psychologically normal during adolescence and in adulthood when gratification of a physical and emotional relationship with another person is not possible. He cites a survey conducted in the late 1980s where 92% of males and 58% of females masturbated. More recent survey states 100% of males and 85% of females masturbate. This author implies that males who suppress the urges of masturbation are maladjusted. Quote, those adolescents who do not masturbate during puberty show regularly in analysis and especially deep repression of infantile masturbation, threats about which have overwhelmed them with guilt and fear. Such patients, incidentally, have a poor prognosis in psychotherapy. Kaplan and Sadok, who co-authored Synopsis of Psychiatry, trace masturbation all the way back to infancy and childhood. The act of self-exploration by the child of his body is normal. This manipulation will lead to masturbation. Because it is viewed as normal at this stage of development, it is viewed as normal at this stage of life. They cite internal conflicts in a young person's life for the guilt over masturbation. This conflict consists of the need for sexual exploration and the values and morals instilled either through the society, through the church, or through the family unit. The natural way to handle conflict is masturbation. Would the psychological community make concessions that masturbation can pose a problem? Quote, masturbation is a psychopathological symptom only when it becomes compulsive. It would be diagnosed as an emotional disturbance, not because it is sexual, but compulsive. Stated differently, masturbation is never the problem, but the obsession or overindulgence of the activity. Kaplan and Sadok go on to state that the compulsion is not the person's fault because when it reaches this level, it is against the person's will. They are a victim of something they cannot control. In this psychological literature, a young person who abstains from masturbation is the one with the problem. Scruples about masturbation involve some oversensitive, pious young people in the danger of suicide. It is anxiety felt about it, not the practice itself, that is harmful. Constructive advice on the subject should not aim at stopping the habit, always a futile endeavor according to them, but at removing the attendant anxiety, explaining its normalcy, and diverting anxiety to constructive activities. Craighead and Neroff write, while in earlier historical periods, masturbation was considered a sign of depravity and sinfulness, it is more generally accepted today as a common practice among adolescents and adults, both male and female. A parent listening to this may conclude that their youngest is abnormal because he or she doesn't masturbate, and that in fact the parent's scruples and faith beliefs may be compounding hidden psychological problems. Well, what about the religious community? In the past, religious groups have condemned masturbation as an unnatural act, according to Romans 1:27 and following. Because masturbation is a solitary action, it brings religious condemnation because God created sexual intimacy between a man and a woman to promote oneness emotionally and physically. From what we have already read in the medical and psychological communities, we should not be surprised that in the religious community, the opposition to masturbation has softened. It very well could be that in the years to come, masturbation will be ignored by the church. In reality, that's what we're living with today. So what does the liberal people say in the religious movement? Because there are no passages in the Bible that discuss the topic of masturbation, and Jesus did not give his opinion on masturbation, he apparently did not consider masturbation of great importance. When liberals are challenged on masturbation and fantasies, they would typically respond that their moral code is not solely based on the Bible. They integrate the findings of science and medicine. They believe that most sexuality and mental health professionals have concluded that such fantasies are normal and healthy. They are not harmful. Because God created us as sexual and natural attraction, they are automatic and unavoidable. The individual has no control over these fantasies, and therefore they cannot be sinful. Most liberal Christians would conclude that masturbation is a harmless activity, one that is not particularly sinful. It generates considerable pleasure and teaches the individual about the body's responses. What do the conservatives have to say? Although there are no Bible passages directly condemning masturbation, the practice is condemned by conservative Christian groups. Generally, there are six main approaches within conservative Christianity. The positions are: number one group labels masturbation as a form of adultery. Life Bible Class teaches that masturbation is a violation of one of the Ten Commandments. You shall not commit adultery. They cite 1 Corinthians 7:4, indicating that sexual satisfaction is mutual, not exclusive. Sexual satisfaction outside of the bond of marriage is adultery and therefore a sin. Another group says masturbation is a sin because of sexual fantasies. It is not the same as adultery, but it is sinful when accompanied by sexual fantasies and impure thoughts. It is also sin when it becomes habit forming. A third position is masturbation is a form of impurity and uncleanness. Therefore, it is a sin. Radio Bible Class believes that habitual self-pleasing is contained within the catch-all terms lasciviousness, impurity, and uncleanness. Leviticus 15:16 and 17, Mark 7:20 to 22, 2 Corinthians 12:21, Galatians 5:19, Ephesians 5:3 through 5, and Colossians 3:5. A fourth position is this: masturbation is addictive and a misuse of sexuality. Christ Unlimited Ministries concludes that God created sexuality in order to be enjoyed only between two heterosexual married spouses. Masturbation is singular and therefore a misuse and sinful. Masturbation is addictive because the individual craves increasingly extreme acts to maintain the same degree of excitement. A fifth position is masturbation is against natural law. This argument states that the sexual organs are only for procreation and the mutual satisfaction of both spouses. Any other use is sinful and selfish. And then the final position under the conservative movement is this: masturbation is a violation of God's purpose for sex. Dawson McAllister condemns masturbation because God created sex to overcome man's loneliness. Sex was meant for two people. Masturbation goes against God's purposes for sexuality. He continues, sexual fantasies almost always accompany masturbation. Masturbation can damage a person sexually. Their future sex life in marriage could suffer. He writes, masturbation is an unhealthy way to deal with loneliness, and masturbation is almost always a symptom of a deeper need. Roman Catholicism. In a 1975 declaration given by Pope Paul VI, he writes, masturbation constitutes a grave moral disorder. Masturbation is an intrinsically and seriously disordered act. The deliberate use of the sexual faculty outside of normal conjugal relations essentially contradicts the finality of the faculty, for it lacks the sexual relationship called for by the moral order, namely the relationship that realizes the full sense of mutual self-giving and human procreation in the context of true love. All deliberate exercise of sexuality must be reserved to this particular relationship. The paper continues, even if it cannot be proved that Scripture condemns this sin by name, the tradition of the church has rightly understood it to be condemned in the New Testament when the latter speaks of impurity, unchasteness, and other vices contrary to chastity and continence. The frequency of the phenomena in question is certainly to be linked with man's innate weakness following original sin, he writes, but it is also to be linked with the loss of a sense of God, with the corruption of moral engendered by the commercialization of vice, with the unrestrained licentiousness of so many public entertainments and publications, as well as with the neglect of modesty, which is the guardian of chastity. Kind of a lengthy, wordy declaration, but at the heart of it, they condemn it as sin. So what can we conclude? What can we learn from these other prevalent viewpoints? First, it is easy to set up a straw man and then burn it. We will learn later on just because the word masturbation is not specifically used, nor is it even called a sin explicitly in the Bible, does not mean a student of the word with proper hermeneutical principles cannot implicitly prove masturbation is sinful. Rather, appealing to deductive rationalization, we will appeal to inductive illumination. Second, many of the arguments within the conservative Christian circles sound biblical, but they lack scriptural support and contextual argument. Third, many of the arguments in the liberal and neo-Christian communities follow the medical and the psychological research and conclusions. There has been no critical thinking or analysis. And then fourth, the medical and psychological communities have eliminated God in theory and in practice. Therefore, when you rule out God, you eliminate a viable, more understandable reason for the problem and liberating solutions. The next time we get together, we will talk about natural apologetics. How do these groups justify the condoning and the endorsement of masturbation?